Live from New York, this is the Ground Truth Podcast, your weekly dose of AI news and insights with Adam Wenchel and John Dickerson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Ground Truth. We've got an exciting show today, talking about the big NVIDIA earnings that were reported yesterday evening after the markets closed, and also some interesting, really cool stuff around code completion and a new tool called Cursor AI that's got a lot of buzz and people are getting pretty excited about. And then we'll talk a little bit about major new regulation in California, as California often does, leading the way and showing one potential way that foundation models could be regulated.
Cool. Yeah, well, we can kick it off maybe with the NVIDIA earnings. You know, this was looked forward to for months. We had most big tech earnings a few weeks back, and they were kind of mixed across the board. And then everyone was saying, hey, end of August, NVIDIA is going to drop earnings. And Adam, I don't know if you have a hot take on the the big numbers that have gone both up and down regarding NVIDIA recently.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was a historic beat, over $1 billion above estimates, analyst estimates. So, you know, any way you look at it, it was a solid quarter. I think the hard part for them in the environment, there was just such a mixture of expectations, and there was no way that they could, kind of satisfy all the emotion that was around there. And so, their stock got hammered in after hours trading, which is silly. I think what we're seeing is kind of more the effects of short-term traders than long-term traders. I think if you're a long-term investor, you had to come out of that call still feeling very bullish about your investment and long on them.
Yeah, hard to agree with that. And I mean, to back up that statement quantitatively, NVIDIA, I think, was down up to 7% in after hours, and I think today it's only down like 2 or 3%. But basically all of the frenemies of NVIDIA, like AMD and ARM and Intel, are up today based on NVIDIA's earnings. No other reason than that. So there is this longer term, to Adam's point, I think, bullishness around AI and AI hardware still. It's just, NVIDIA people, so many longs, so many shorts on NVIDIA right now. It's very expensive to do any sort of day trading around NVIDIA because it's the center of everyone's attention. And so, today we're down, but give it a week.
Yeah, 100%. And, it'll be interesting. September is traditionally a very volatile month as people get, as a lot of finance professionals get back from their summer in the Hamptons. And so we'll see how that reacts. But, if you listen to Jensen's Q&A session, there were some pretty strong words in there. Indirectly he addressed competition with people like Intel and AMD, and he said a couple different times that if you look at the overall server market, there's trillions of dollars of deployed servers out there in the world, and as those get upgraded and people move, and people kind of upgrade that compute to do get more computational power, get better efficiency per watt, more computation per watt. They're increasingly turning to NVIDIA's products. And so, not just, I think one of the things he was trying to really get across was they're more than just generative AI, right? Like there's all sorts of computational workloads that are going in this direction. And then the other thing, when it comes to AMD, he was asked about, their server products and the different chips they manufacture and vertical integration specifically. The question was around, you guys are getting so big, do you want to be more vertically integrated so that you can scale better, was sort of this analyst's premise. And he actually broke down kind of the different chips that they manufacture that go into building a data center products. And also he had a very clear argument for why they worked with integrators to kind of do that last mile to package them up. And it was just a really fascinating breakdown. And it was one of those things where when you look at what they manufacture, they have a really complete stack so that all the pieces that you need to manufacture a data center in a box, they control. And then, there's some little details in how you assemble them that they let the integrators handle so that they can cater into the individual markets. But it's pretty impressive what they've built, and it's the culmination of, a decade plus of investments, and something that, even people like AMD who make excellent GPUs, it's going to take them a long time to catch up with that full ecosystem. And that's before you get into, I know one of the things you're passionate about, John, is the CUDA and the software ecosystem around NVIDIA and kind of, softening some of the hegemony around that. So there's a lot of challenges for both Intel and ARM right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we really can't overstate just how complex this full stack is, both on the hardware and the software side. that NVIDIA has developed over decades, frankly, at this point. And I think the first time I wrote CUDA was in 2007 or 2008 for a physics-based simulation of what's called an optical tweezer, which is a little laser that you can use to drag around micron-sized silicate beads to build things. And CUDA was initially built to do scientific computing like that, and then that's a very complex set of tasks that many hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of scientists, of engineers have been working on literally for decades at this point, and they've been executing like crazy for decades. There's some interesting stats though that might say it might be hard to execute moving forward, in that I think I read that 75% of NVIDIA employees are millionaires, and something like 1 out of 5 are now worth at least $10 million or $20 million, something along those lines. And so one does worry at some point about the talent that built NVIDIA to be what it is, now being rich enough to own yachts across the board, and maybe that'll be a blessing for AMD and Intel to come in and actually be able to outcompete the new wealthy that have been built by Jensen over these decades.
Yeah, you're right. That does create a big challenge, but we'll see. I think there's some interesting things, and then you have, I think one of the other interesting things that's been somewhat reported, but they delved into more in the analyst call, is the Blackwell rollout over the next few quarters, and that got, it was the subject of a little bit of a delay. Jensen was asked about this. Sounds like there was no logic or anything like that. There was just part of the design was leading to basically causing lower yield than they wanted in the manufacturing. So for people who don't know, like when you manufacture these chips, they're very complex, and they're obviously they're working at what are they at now, like a 2 nanometer process or 1.5 nanometer process, and so you just expect that a certain percentage of them, let's say 5-10%, or I don't know exactly what the current yields are gonna be faulty. And if that percentage is a little bit too high, then they need to redesign the chips or problematic parts of it to get it to yield the amount they want, so that they get enough good ones coming off of the line. And so I think they just made some changes to the design that were basically there to kind of increase the yields around the GPU. But that, he talked about kind of the advantages and the speed up, both of the individual chip speed, but also the fact that they're able to package them together. So basically the way it works is you can put 72 of them together in a way that basically acts as a single GPU, and so the scalability for when you're assembling these huge 100,000 plus GPU data centers is going to be extremely enhanced over current Hopper generation and previous generation designs.
Yeah, big question is, can it play Doom? And next week we'll talk actually about a recent release of something that came out of DeepMind, which is showing that you can basically create, I think they built on Stable Diffusion, but a diffusion model to effectively create like game engine. So they were able to run Doom basically based on a foundation model. So, thanks for Jensen for allowing us to be able to do super, super interesting stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to maybe close out this NVIDIA chat with a quick prediction, which is I think NVIDIA, I don't know about the timeline, we'll get into being a cloud service provider. So when it comes into, they're obviously killing it with the creation of hardware, with the creation of the software stack around that. That discussion's got to be happening internally, is, what do we do next? And one thing they could be doing, right, is moving into the CSP competition world against Azure, against AWS, and against GCP.
Interesting. I don't know. I think I'm going to take the other side on that one, John. We'll see. We'll definitely have to come up with a friendly wager on that. I think they're very thoughtful about where they start and where they stop, and they flirted with that in the past a few years ago, and I think they're content to just provide the chips, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah, I'll give you a little reasoning behind what I'm thinking here, and that is that I think just because there's so much money here that NVIDIA is going to start seeing heavier competition in the hardware space from hopefully an AMD or upstart companies. Grok, for example, is famous for this on the inference side of things, and so I think that some of the margins that they have around this will get competed down, and then NVIDIA is going to have to start looking around for high margin businesses, and cloud is famous for that. So I think they could be positioned well there. And to your point, they are very picky about where they compete, and one thing that would do is anger a lot of their biggest customers. Obviously, it would anger Microsoft. It would obviously anger AWS and so on. So I'll take that bet.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's check back in
5 years.
And we'll settle it. Excellent. All right. Well, moving on. When generative AI first came out, and intuitively, a lot of people felt the promise of it when they started playing around. But one of the first areas to actually really start to increase human productivity and create real world value was coding bots, which there were a number of early ones from various people, and also just the straight up using some of the general purpose models for coding exploded into actually a lot of programmers' toolbox. Right, they started really using these tools more and more, and it almost feels like we're kind of on the cusp of another leap forward there, a wave forward. And John, I know one you've been playing around this week is Cursor AI.
Yeah. So, like Adam mentioned, these copilots, these code copilots, or literally GitHub Copilot, were some of the first to market Gen AI applications that really saw an uptick in usage, right? So we saw, text to image creation with companies like Jasper. We saw obviously the ChatGPTs of the world, but also GitHub Copilot. I've had this running in PyCharm and in VS Code now for, I guess it's like 2 years or something like that. And I pay the $20 a month or whatever for it. I'll probably stop though after using Cursor a bit over the last couple of days. It's been interesting to see these copilots come out. Microsoft obviously built a model behind GitHub Copilot, in part trained on GitHub data. They've been getting sued over this as well for violating various licenses and the GitHub code bases on which they trained. And a lot of those lawsuits have actually been coming out in Microsoft's favor. So that's been an interesting thing that we'll keep tracking, obviously, over the coming months and years. But yeah, so those copilots, like Adam mentioned, are typically fine-tuned models, these foundation models that are then fine-tuned on like a coding task, or some of them are based on like DeepSeek, V2 Coder, things like that, but largely haven't used agent-based multi-step reasoning to provide additional value to users. I think Cursor, it's either Cursor AI or Cursor.com or Cursor something, right? But Cursor is one of the first what I would say are like multi-step reasoning-based IDEs for coding that I've seen. And I've been playing around with it a bit, and it really is leaps and bounds beyond what you could do with like a GitHub Copilot and so on. And the cool thing about this is actually they're not building their own models as far as I can tell. So like the one I've been using, and it seems to be the most popular version, is connecting Cursor to Anthropic's Sonnet 3.5 to do relatively quick, relatively cheap completions, or like natural language to code and so on. And frankly, like this idea is blowing me away. Both Adam and I are not fresh out of undergrad cracked hackers anymore, because we don't write code 90 hours a week. And at this point, it really does feel really cool to be able to just dive right back into basically hacker level code using a very sort of slick interface like this. And so coming back to Adam before dropping it off for some comments from him, Cursor is able to not spend huge capex building out their own foundation models. They're able to just do API access, or I'm sure they also have the ability to do local model access, but they're getting this value out of sort of longer term reasoning, multi-step reasoning, to do better effectively tab to code complete, to kind of predict what you're going to code.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for the last year or so, a lot of the effort into basically leveraging generative AI to accomplish particular tasks, like let's say coding. A lot of the effort's been on how do you fine tune the model, or even train from scratch a model that's like really good at this specific task. And now it's seeming like perhaps the best way to go is to not try that at all. Just use the general purpose model, but focus on the prompt engineering, the agentic behavior, things like that, all the things that are built on top of it, and put your energy there. And we've seen other data points around that, like Adept is a good example of that. They spent millions training their own models, and now post kind of like the divestiture of part of their team, they've said we're out of the training models business. We're just focusing on the tooling around it so that we can provide a great user experience for people.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I mean, obviously, as software developers and engineers, there's always this undercurrent of will programmers, will software engineers be replaced, or to what level will they be enabled versus replaced by this technology? And so over the coming weeks, as more people start to use these newer generations of smarter code completers, it'll be fun to track that on Twitter as well.
Do you have a spicy prediction there, John?
I don't think we're going to be replaced, and we can ask Rafa to throw up a meme which basically says, we'll flash that on screen. It makes me laugh a little bit. It's one reason why I don't think we'll be replaced necessarily is, modern software development, modern software engineering is more than just writing very nice Python code and Bash scripts and so on, right? It's the creation of large complex systems and the maintenance of large complex systems and pipelines that allow you to ingest data and push new code without breaking everything and so on. It's a very sort of complex organism, right? The modern software development body, and I still haven't seen. Maybe this is the next step after agent-based code completion is going to be full-on multi-agent systems where different coders are able to, use their set of agents to interact in a way that doesn't, absolutely tank the entire company when they all start, throwing, forced merges on top of code that other agents wrote. So I think we're still at least a couple of years away from this. But yeah, I don't know if that's 10 years. I don't know if that's ever, but it's certainly not in the next 6 months.
Interesting. I'll see. That might be one I'll take the under on. Well, I'm thinking things are moving pretty quickly right now.
Okay, well, I'm either going to lose a lot of money or not lose a lot of money based on this. Cool. And I guess changing gears a little bit into, we've mentioned on past podcasts as well that the regulatory space is quickly moving in AI, ML, technology, to some extent crypto as well. And a lot of this has been triggered based on the Biden administration's executive order, which was now about a year ago. So I think it was in October of 2023, basically entreating all agencies in the U.S. government to start thinking really heavily about safety and responsibility and regulation around AI and ML and what that looks like. And so flashing back, 11 months ago to that EO, one thing the Biden EO talked about was putting a limit on the number of parameters that can go into a foundation model. Was like 10 to the 26 or some fairly arbitrary number. And a lot of people sort of focused on that as this, number that kind of came out of nowhere that could severely hamper or not hamper the development of models within the United States. And we're seeing some of that again in a piece of legislation that's moving through the California state government right now called SB 1047, the Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Models Act. I'm sure is some acronym that I could pronounce. It's going through, I think it actually just passed the legislative bodies in California and is now going to the desk of Gavin Newsom, their governor, to be signed or not signed. And it has another one of these fancy special numbers in it, which is basically if you spend more than $100 million on training costs, then that's going to be called a commercial model. And if you spend less than that, it's going to be called a research model. And the regulations around those two models based on this $100 million are going to be different. And so a lot of folks have come out in support or not in support of this bill. It's been evolving over time. For example, Elon Musk was against it for a while and now has said that he is in favor of it. Nancy Pelosi, famous day trader and famous politician, is against it, saying that it will slow down development of models in the United States.
Is Elon in favor because he believes it's the right thing to do, or because his team's based in Austin and he wants to inflict it upon his competitors?
Elon is a strategic man and a strategic leader of multiple businesses, of which many are buying large amounts of H100s to build large foundation models that are famously not as quote-unquote aligned as those coming out of Anthropic. And so, yes, he may be trying to stifle competition from his California competitors. And you could argue Nancy Pelosi is against it because it will prevent H100s from being sold, and she is a famous shareholder in a number of our technology companies. So I won't speak for Arthur there, but I will speak for myself. As Adam knows, as folks on this pod know, I'm broadly, tentatively against a lot of this sort of ham-fisted regulation coming down the pipeline. But yeah, Adam, where are you coming down on this?
Oh man, it's giving me echoes to a couple decades ago with the encryption debates around, how many bit key length you're allowed to export encryption algorithms and things like that. And it's one of these things because there's not an obvious easy way to regulate this or to draw those lines. And so people just find a random number and pick it. And we can all agree that it's like it is random and it's not necessarily the right way to do it. But at the same time, I think I'd be hard pressed to tell you like, what a kind of an accurate, smart way would be, especially with things evolving so quickly. Like, $100 million may seem like a joke a year from now. Any arbitrary number of parameters maybe at orders of magnitude past that in a year. So it's just it's all changing so quickly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And to their credit, I actually think the Biden administration and whatever administration ends up coming out, either the Harris or the Trump administration, they have been talking to folks in tech, it seems. One obviously worries about regulatory capture when it comes to getting certain folks from certain things in the room to set some of these numbers to build moats around their own, large foundation model systems that they've been pouring tens of billions of dollars into. But it has been at least a little bit of a blessing that these regulators seem to at least be open to discussing tech with people who are actually building the stuff, which has not always been the case when it comes to regulations. But still, I'm a little bit bearish on a lot of these documents that are passing through legislatures right now.
Yeah, we will see.
Cool.
Awesome. All right, so wrapping it up with our usual set of predictions. So, John?
Yeah, so I already made one, which maybe I will lose money to Adam on, which is that I think in the coming, let's say, half decade or so, NVIDIA will take steps to move into being a tier 1 cloud service provider. And, obviously they'll be AI focused, but a lot of CSPs these days are very AI focused. My second prediction is going to be that SB 1047 is going to pass. I think Gavin Newsom is going to sign it. He's very pro-regulation in general, and the tech world will have its divisions on opinion on that bill. But it will certainly be interesting when this does pass, and that's a prediction. It hasn't happened yet. It'll be interesting to see what other states do there as well, right? So California is obviously not representative of all the states in the United States. So maybe we'll see other states trying to compete against them. For example, Texas, maybe with Elon's support, saying, hey, we will not regulate what's going on internally.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. Cool. My prediction is that NVIDIA is going to continue to take a lot of market share from Intel and even ARM for the next couple of years, possibly even longer. I think that we may over the next year or two start to see a deceleration of the growth of the clusters that people are buying for training. I think there's some maybe natural limits in the world, in the market that are going to start to come into play in a couple of years, not yet. But what I also see is like the capacity for inferencing is that's going to grow for the next decade, I believe, because as people start to, it's going to take a decade for people to really start to weave these new capabilities into all, whether it's coding or 100 other things, into all aspects of their daily life. And so I think that inferencing still has many, many years more of growth. And I think that also just for like general purpose computing tasks, like non-AI, non-generative AI, people are starting to use GPUs more and more, and massively parallel processing. And so it's tends to be a lot more efficient per watt, and energy costs really drive a lot of the cost of operating a data center. And so I think that, I think NVIDIA is going to really continue to rapidly take market share from Intel and others.
Well, adding on to that, I just looked up Intel's market cap while you were talking. So NVIDIA in their earnings call claims that they're going to do a $50 billion share buyback. That would get them more than 50% of Intel. So instead of doing that share buyback, they could just gain a controlling interest in a legacy CPU provider.
Yeah. I'm not. I don't know if I don't know. I don't want my speedboat to have an anchor that big attached to it. I don't think, but.
No, well, we can leave it with that then.
All right. Sounds good, everyone. Enjoy. We'll be back next week with more hot takes and coverage of the day's news in AI.
Yeah.